Δεν ξέρω αν ακούγομαι. Καλησπέρα σας. Είμαι η Μαρία Γεωργοπούλου, η Διευθύντρια της Γεναδίου Βιβλιοθήκης και είναι μεγάλη μου χαρά να σας καλωσορίσω στη σημερινή μας διάλεξη στο Kotzen Hall, όπου θα έχουμε ένα θέμα πολύ ενδιαφέρον βυζαντινής αρχαιολογίας. Θα μου επιτρέψετε να συνεχίσω στα αγγλικά. So it's my pleasure to welcome you tonight to Kotzen Hall, for a lecture on Byzantine archaeology by Suna Çağatay, who is an associate professor of archaeology and architectural history at Mulla Sidki Koçman University. I apologize for my pronunciation of Turkish. Suna did her university studies in Ankara at Bilkent University, from where she received a BA and a master's degree. And then she crossed the Mediterranean and the Atlantic to go to the United States, and she did her PhD in architectural history and theory at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And for her PhD and for her studies, she focused on monuments of the late Byzantine period in Bithynia. And she looked at Bithynia as a borderland between Byzantium and Islam, under the direction, she did her PhD under the direction of the much beloved late Robert Osterhout. And I think many of you will probably sense some of his spirit in her approach and methodology. Suna has published some of the material of her dissertation as a book, and I will come back to this, but she has published several important studies on architectural production on the frontiers and borderlands in the medieval Mediterranean, focusing on builders, on construction techniques, and on urban memory and how different cultures came together, especially on the Byzantine-Ottoman cusp, in Prusa, Bursa, Triglia, Nigde, but also in Komotini in Thrace. Only a scholar that is able and who is able to go beyond the traditional boundaries of disciplines, the study of Byzantine and Islamic art, could actually decipher this transitional material from the eclectic style of the Lascarids and the early Paleologi to the early Ottomans, as they are defining their own architectural presence in Anatolia. Her monograph out of the dissertation was a book that was very much reworked, and it's entitled The First Ottoman Capital, Bursa, and it appeared in 2020. And it offers a clear and rich view of this complex material. And some of us were very lucky yesterday to hear Suna in a small seminar explain to us some of the main issues of her book. Suna, after her PhD, received the fieldwork grants from Dumbarton Oaks and the University of Oxford, and she also held postdoctoral research positions at the University of Cambridge, MIT, and the University of Tel Aviv. Her deep experience of the monuments and the terrain has been reinforced by her participation not only at excavations, but at a Getty Connecting Art History seminar with SOAS from the University of London. And this seminar took a group of similarly minded people through Turkey, Israel, and Crusader Greece. And I was very fortunate to be part of that group. And this is where I met Suna, and I appreciated her particular view on art history and architectural history. Later on, she was immersed in the study of ancient cities as they were modified under Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And she co-edited 2 books. The first one, Cities as Palimpsests, ? Responses to Antiquity in Eastern Mediterranean Urbanism, with Elizabeth Key-Fowden, Edward Kochhill, and Louise Blanc, and with Zaido, Mapping Cities in the Middle Eastern and North Africa region, visualizing the untold narratives of heritage. So as you can see, her interest in cities, in urban fabric, in monuments, in architectural architectural construction, and the way all these function together has led her to take on an excavation of a very important site at Anaia, Kadıkalesi, in Aydin. And she has been the director of that site since 2022, This is also combined with cultural heritage management. And she has used immersive technologies in archaeology and cultural heritage management to understand the site from a broader historical perspective. It is on this topic that her presentation will focus today, as you see on our big screen. Please join me in welcoming Suna to the podium.
Am I visible behind the lectern?
Not really.
Yeah, anyway, that's usually my problem. I often wear high heels, but still, it doesn't help. Anyway, thank you very much for coming. And Maria, thank you so much for this generous introduction. Can you all hear me fine? Yeah? Excellent. So again, I want to thank you all for coming. I have two of my team members in the audience, which makes me really happy. I saw a couple of you yesterday during the seminar on Bursa, so thanks for coming back to hear more, this time on Anaia. I also want to say hi to the ones who are watching me behind the screen in Turkey or wherever they are. I hope you're going to enjoy this presentation in the next half an hour or so, or even more. So today what I decided to do is to introduce you to the site a little bit before I go into the actual topic, because it's a site well known in Turkey, but it's not really well known outside the Turkey. And it has really good architectural legacy that we can attribute to the Byzantine as well as pre-Byzantine and post-Byzantine periods. So with that, I'm going to start. So I want to talk a little bit about the excavation history. But before we do that, I think I need to help you to reorient yourselves, right? So where we are is opposite Samos, the Greek island of Samos. This is where the site is situated, and it's surrounded by Piriene, Mycale Mountains, the ancient city of Miletos, and the Ephesus is right here. And you're going to see that the site is going to get some of similarities and resemblances and overlaps with those sites as well. So the site itself, which you see on the screen, sits on a prehistoric mound, and the site also has a very strong stratigraphic record showing occupations and disruptions from the Bronze Age to the 19th century. And just to give you an idea how rich the archaeological evidence is, I'm showing you this Hittite warrior figure that's roughly dated to the 15th or 14th century BC, which is now on display at the Archaeological Museum. And this is the perimeters of the site with the fortification walls, and this is roughly showing the site around 2010, during the excavations in 2010. Maria mentioned that I worked with Bob Osterhout, to whom I owe a lot of my training and the way I look at buildings and archaeology. And interestingly, perhaps one of the first visual recordings of Anaia was done by Bob himself. In this photo that I found at the Dumbarton Oaks Fieldwork Archive, it shows the site in 1982. With a photo taken by him. This is pretty interesting because the work at the site started in 2001, and in those four images, you're looking at 2009, 11, 15, and this is 2020 photo. So you're looking at the amount of new trenches being opened and architectural evidence also revealing. And then you're going to also appreciate the protective roof that is chosen to cover the most important architectural remain at the site, which is a basilical church. What else do we have from this site? As I said, the excavation started in 2001, and they were carried on, conducted by Professor Zeynep Mercangöz of Ege University until her retirement in 2021. And the site, as those pictures show reveals a very fascinating range of architectural and material evidence. It speaks for a continuity from the 5th to the 14th centuries. And in the publications, we also note, in the publications of the former leadership, we also note that there is a hiatus from the 14th to the 19th century when the ramparts were built, which you see over here, in order to protect or defend the coastline, again, during the Greek Independence War. And also a masjid was built. So the former leadership discusses that the site was very rich in terms of its architectural evidence from the 5th to the 14th, with some previous remains dating to the Hittite period or Bronze Age and so on. But they also discuss a clear cut after the 14th century leading into the 19th. So one other thing that we often note with the previous leadership or the excavations is the fact that the publications usually focus on the material evidence, especially the ceramic, metal, and the glass evidence. And one of the key publications to show tonight is the book that is edited by the former director, Professor Mercan Göz, a bilingual publication titled Byzantine Craftsmen, Latin Patrons, published in 2013, in which only ceramics, metal, and glass evidence is discussed. So the rich material evidence is also something that we observe at the Aydın Archaeological Museum, for which we have a very nice window, which you see right here, with the Byzantine period ceramics, pieces of ivory icons, jewelry, details, molds, and so on. And I do have a detail for it as well. The Katsion, for example, one of the lightning arrangements, the seals, jewelry, molds, which you see over here, and then the ivory icons that I put right here. In those previous studies, one of the major segments for Anaia's history was of its commercial identity. And so in another publication which you see on the screen, which was done by the previous director, Anaia is or was described as a site that was granted the immunity from all fees, exactions, and the commercion, the tax, in the aftermath of the 1261 agreement with the Genoese and the 1265 agreement with the Venetians. And we know in the historical accounts that in the 1261 agreement, especially it allocated the Genoese a loggia, a palatium, churches, baths, bakery, gardens, and a sufficient number of houses as residences for the merchants that are situated in the commercially key locations. And Anaia is or happens to be one of them, besides Smyrna, Constantinople, Thessaloniki, Mytilene, Chios, and Crete. And Anaia is also mentioned as an emporium, as well as a katepanikion. And in that previous publication, which you see on the screen, which was published in 2010, it was discussed that this area that you see circled in green over here, and for which I do have a drawing as well, this B40 area was labeled as the node or the residence of the person who was in charge of the commercion tax. This is what was attributed by the previous director on the basis of the textual evidence. So they also decided to do excavations here in 2009, 2015, and 16, during which they excavated Pithoi as well as Zeuxippos and the Aegean wares, complemented by a statite cross and several spindle walls. From this context, no seals, no coins, specifically no Western import ceramics or small finds were identified. But yet the location was identified as the site of the Commercion. But in the nearby sectors, a single issue of Boniface of Montferrat from 1204 to 1207, or Demetrius of Montferrat, 1207 and 1224, and 2 other Genoese or Venetian issues were unearthed, dating roughly to the 13th century. And this was all discussed in this master's thesis by Umut Kardeşler. So in the summer of 2024, with the financial support from the Ministry of Culture and Tourism, as well as a support from the Mari Jaharis Foundation for Byzantine Art and Culture, we decided to carry on excavating this particular B40 context. And we realized that this is not a single or independent or individual building on its own, but rather the walls are haphazardly created within this context. They are not related to one another, all those walls. And then we also couldn't find anything to support this Commercion or Commerciarion discussion. Rather, this area was perhaps one of the earlier fortification walls that we can attribute it to the 11th or the 10th century context. And this is, after the excavations, one of the major walls in the B40 area, just to, as a point of comparison, that I am talking about or I'm making sense in terms of my chronology. This is what we excavated in the B40 area, and this is securely dated 11th century walls from the basilica. So in the absence of a Commercion or Commerciarion, we decided to dig deeper into the archaeological research. We also did some archival studies as well. And the previous core samples that were taken at the site, they usually discuss the fact that the harbor for the site would have been located either to the south or the north of the settlement. But because there is this discussion of the Commerciarion and the treaties that the Byzantines did with the Venetians and the Genoese, with the help of a scholar whose name is Sercan Sağlam, and he's watching us on Zoom, we decided to do a search in the Genoese and Venetian archives to see what kind of a discussion Anaia had in this period. And through our research, for example, we found the references talking about a harbor, a commerciarios, someone who holds the office. And, for example, this one talks about the harbor of Anaia. This particular text talks about a passage at Anaia. And we are on the way to publish an article about this with Sercan Sağlam, discussing the Genoese and the Venetian accounts to argue what kind of a commercial life there was in Anaia, and what kind of ships, commerce, and residential profiles or demography we could see at the site in the 13th century. So especially focusing on this idea of the passage at Anaia, discussing an anchorage or a pier, we went through a lot of portolan charts, especially Sercan did, and he identified the locations that are mentioned in the portolans with the current locations on the coastline of Kuşadası. So this is where we are. And following the documents, archival documents, we are able to say that probably around 3.5 sea miles to the north of the settlement, the anchorage or the pier of Anaia was located. And archaeology also gives us good evidence in terms of how to locate those ships at those anchorage. For example, in 2010, I believe, they found an inscribed block or a block the graffiti of the depictions of different types of ships from the excavations or during the excavations. And just to take a look at those images or graffitis, and you can come up with a Ligno or Galeota, Dromon, and Barchetta. And this Dromon is actually, or the depiction that you see right here, happens to be the logo of our project, which you see the entrance to the deck house. So, discussing the commercial dimensions, locating a harbor, identifying this harbor perhaps as an anchorage point are the new discoveries that we are talking about. We also discovered with Sercan that it's very likely that there was a shipyard just outside the settlement in the place where the former team is discussing an evidence for an harbor. So this is where we see the remains of a shipyard, and this shipyard was not only being used by the Byzantines, but later on by the Beyliks and the Ottomans. And again, on this map, you're gonna see the shipyard location where our site is, and then the anchorage pier that we associate with the site. So this is what I have been doing in the past year. So just to show you that I've been working really hard. So let's try to go back to the actual site itself. So let's start talking about what has been discovered so far. In this aerial view, you are looking at a basilical church, which is right here, with a nave and two side aisles, the main apse, the side apses, the synthronon area, bema area, the ambon, the solea, or the remains of the solea. You are also looking at two narthexes, and inner or outer and outer narthex. There's also a smaller church right here, half of which was demolished by the construction of the 13th century walls. So all those walls come in the 13th century during the reign of the Lascarids. The church was built in the 5th, and then it was remodeled in the 10th and the 11th centuries, and the Lascarids added the exonarthex over here. During the excavations, also, a baptistry was found on the western end of the basilica, perhaps serving not only for this main church, but also for the smaller church as well. You see the baptismal font right here, which was discovered in 2021. And then in the rest, you see the Ottoman Masjid of the 19th century, a couple of cisterns over here, another one right here, and then an immense workshop and residential areas. So at the beginning of my talk, I said most of the publications that was done previously were focusing on the material evidence coming from the site. But recently, at the end of 2024, there was this publication by the former director, Professor Mercan Göz, and from this point on, I'm going to refer it to as the 2024 publication, just to make it consistent. So in this particular publication, she talks about the church as well as the vaulted substructure that I'm going to be talking about today. So I'm using a couple of photos that is coming from her publication just to give you an idea about how the site looked when they discovered the vaulted substructure for the first time. So you're looking at the synthronon of the main apse with the side apse over here. You see this arched area, right? So they only saw a sloping fill, and they decided to go in, and as soon as they went in from this opening, which you see right here, they found non-contextual, I should say, basically debris and fill. And on the walls, they identified frescoes or wall paintings. And then later on, after discovering it in 2011, they carried on working in this area in 2018 and 2020. especially recording the wall paintings and making a good drawings and photos for the paintings. It was also during this time in 2018-2020 an inscribed block on the northern and northwestern end of the vaulted substructure. An inscribed block was identified, and this block refers to the Theodosian Codex 2.8.18, which simply commends stopping litigation on Sundays, and this inscribed block was studied by Hasan Malay, the late Hasan Malay, in the 2018s. And I'm going to come back to that towards the end of my talk. And also, I want to add that when I first arrived at the site in 2022, I was told that they were identifying this vaulted substructure perhaps as a crypt, not as an hagiasma or anything like that. And in the 2022 excavations, which I did with the help of with the guidance and leadership of the Archaeological Museum and its director, Mr. Ali Atmaca, whom I want to thank here, we carried on excavating the vaulted substructure, and we identified an hagiasma. So you're looking at one of the photos that we took just before we started excavating the rest of the structure, after all those previous work that's done by the team. And I think at this point it makes a lot of sense for me to talk or tell you how I got involved with the site, because Maria mentioned that I pretty much did a lot of work on Bithynia for my research and writing. So it began in 2021 when the previous director, Professor Mercan Göz, decided to endorse me or invited me to take over her site. She was retiring, and the Turkish law requires the professors who are retiring to turn over their sites to someone else. So this was the scenario. And in 2022, I got the permit. I was appointed by the Ministry of Tourism and Culture in Turkey, and I became the scientific consultant, working with Ali Atmaca, the director of the director of the Archaeological Museum. And last year, I'm very happy to say that I got the full presidential permit for the site. It means a lot, so I have to share it with you as well. And I'm telling you all those details not to show off or anything like that, but rather telling you that it's a very intricate process, and it involves a lot of stakeholders, and you have to know your balances and so on. So, and I also want to say, projects like this, changing hands and leadership, having scholars and students working, they have a lot of people coming and going, and from different backgrounds, different trainings, and they all contribute to the discussion that we make in the publications and in the lecture halls like the one I'm doing today. So I'm grateful to everyone that worked for Anaia at some point. So my thanks to them as well. So as a scholar who's working on the urban memory of later Byzantium, especially that of the Lascarids, and the cultural transition from the Byzantine into the Anatolian principalities, the picture that I saw, or the publications that I saw on or about Anaia, always fascinated me from the very beginning. So when I set my foot there in 2022, I was very much interested in understanding what went on within the Byzantine chronology at the site, but also before and after the Byzantine chronology at the site, in order to understand how the Byzantine Anaia can be situated within the bigger picture of Anaia. That was my major question. And before going into the actual topic of tonight's talk, I hope you're going to permit me a somewhat personal digression on Anaia. At the end of my first official day at the site back in 2022, I called my advisor, Bob, and I just gave him a brief introduction of the site, what was going on, and I told him about the inscription, this vaulted substructure, the niches that are emerging. I also told him about the paintings and so on. And he just paused a little bit, and then he said, "Oh boy, there's a lot going on. Don't get annihilated there." So a lot of people in this hall, you had the privilege of knowing him. He really loved playing with words. He was very good at it. So I said, what should I do? What should I do? Should I just pack up and leave? He said, no, I didn't mean that. You should stay. I think it's going to be a lot of fun for you. You're going to learn a lot. And joking aside, he said, just commute with the buildings there. Commute with the site. Just talk to the site. Try to see what's going on in the site. This is something that he always recommended to his friends, to his students. So that's what he did. So in the next hour, or half an hour today, that's what I want to do. I'll try to commute with the vaulted substructure at Anaia, and I'll revisit some of the conclusions that are suggested in this 2024 publication. And I also want to share how I feel or how I read things, and I promise I won't get annihilated. So, of course, I'm going to need your help as well. I know there is a very learned group here for Byzantine archaeology. So I want to test some of the findings, some of my interpretations. So you're looking at a general view of the substructure after we finished the excavations in 2022. So in terms of where we are within the complex, within the site, here you're looking at the eastern apse of the church. You see the lines of the nave and the side aisles, the main apse, and the side apses over here. And this is where the substructure runs through, right underneath the eastern apse of the building. And then I have drawings here, which is showing us the site on the east wall of the substructure, running from south to north. And then this is the western wall, quite in the opposite direction. So in terms of the upper structure, as I said, it's a building that was built in the 5th century with using alternating brick and stone and mortar, and it was probably topped with a wooden roof. And the remains of the eastern end, which you see right here with the synthronon, and here, for example, this is in the earlier stages of the excavations. You don't see any of the bima or the solea details that are coming later on. And then one more detail that I want to share. Hold on. Is this structure which you see over here. It's the next vaulted substructure. Although its walls are totally demolished, and it's connected to a side passage, which you see right here. And all those drawings are done by my students and also Mina Hazal Taşçı, so I want to thank her as well. So let's go to the actual thing that I want to say about this other substructure that we see coming after the vaulted substructure right here. This is totally demolished, and you're looking at this area in a photo in which members of the team are doing some work. In terms of, again, the good chronology of the site, this is coming from a recent excavation, a publication, an article done by Tuğçe Işık on geoheritage. She is locating the substructure over here and the baptistry right here. And then if you pay attention, I should forewarn you before we go any further, the legends over here are wrong. You should see the oranges as the 13th century and the beige as the 11th century. So that's my correction as well. She didn't speak to me when she was publishing, so this is what happened to her. But she did something very good for us. She did a mortar analysis collected from different sections of the church, including the substructure around here and here. But, for example, for us to understand the stratigraphy of the substructure, she didn't collect multiple mortar samples from the different phases of the building. So she only collected the samples from the first phase of the structure. Okay, so I criticized a lot of people. So I should briefly talk about maybe how I read the phasing in the building. So if you look at this structure, you would, perhaps I should go back to that drawing. If you pay attention to here, you see the cross-vaulted areas or the barrel vaults in the roof system. And then you see the niches of one over here, directly going under the side apse, and the second niche over here. And there is an arch right there. And then next to the arch, you see a pilaster, another one over here, another one right here. So those areas that I indicated, they are dated to the first phase of the building. And then also, if you look at the first phase of the building, you realize that the construction is done with the ashlar masonry on the east wall, and on the west wall, it's less characteristic. It's more like a rubble stone that's used for the construction. And for the arches, we have very good characteristic 5th century bricks and mortars used. Okay. I went ahead. Sorry. Okay, and also besides those pilasters and wall construction and the niches and the arch that you see over here, a layer of fresco was added to the program. So this was the first phase of the construction. And then later on, based on the wall construction technique analysis, complemented with the comparisons that's coming from other locations within the site, we see that a wall was built in order to block the northern entrance to the vaulted substructure, which you see right here, the remains of which. And then a pier was added over here, probably because of the problems in the terrain and stability, in order to lift up or carry the building and the church on top. One of the things that I want to suggest for this newly added pier in the second phase, in order to lift up perhaps or support the cracks in the roof, just in front of the niche, the northern niche over here, is comparable, I should say, to the 9th and 10th century phases, very close to the baptistry over here. Construction-wise, they are comparable. During the excavations just in front of this pier, right here, while we are looking for the foundation levels, we also found a pre-Byzantine, I should say, maybe late Roman area. Probably it's, again, indicating pre-Byzantine layers can be attributed to this vaulted substructure. The southern end of the building was also blocked, which you see over here, probably in the late 11th century. So the entrance to the vaulted substructure was blocked from here, and then also right here, which you see on the screen. And then this was also the time when they added this double columns with an egg and dart frieze, possibly dating to the 2nd century BC. The egg and dart, and the capital is probably from the 2nd century AD. So you're looking at pre-excavation or pre-2022 season photo of the egg and dart frieze and the columns, and this is after the excavations were finished. And towards the foundation level of the columns, we found an Ganos amphora, type that is known as Günsenin I. It was found in between the columns, and it was dated by Sinan Mimaroğlu, who is the excavation director of Ayasuluk, a leading specialist of those amphorae in the excavations coming from Turkey, and he suggested that it could be dated to the 11th. So another detail that's securing my dating as well. So if you go back to the niche idea where I discuss the hagiasma coming in, you're looking at the niche before we started the excavations, and then perhaps a couple of weeks after, we are looking at the south niche coming from the east wall, so looking at this one. And then if you see, if you can pay attention, you see 2 layers of frescoes over here, the window opening and the channel to have the water running through. And then later on, you're looking at further cleaning around the area, which led us to a surface with a hydraulic mortar or water-resistant mortar over here, and the surfaces were covered with lime with the depiction of crosses on either side. You can also see a mortise hole to perhaps lift up and block the water coming in and pouring into this area. And then our further excavations also found this water, or pipe system, I should say, taking the water from the pool area or the fountain area and taking it down to this channel. You see the tip of the pipes right here, and pouring into the main drainage channel, which you see right here. And then this is also a view from the niche leading into the main drainage area. So this forms like an L shape, the design. And again, the comparisons for those pipes are coming from the 5th and the 6th century context of Ephesus, especially Ayasuluk area. The major medieval site, I should say, in Ephesus. Okay, so while this section of hagiasma, especially judging from the opening in the middle of the west wall, we note that the substructure was extended towards the west with this demolished area that you're looking at. And it was also connected, as I showed in that previous drawing, through a flight of stairs descending from here, going into this area, and then leading into the vaulted substructure. Again, you're looking at the drawings. Of course, you might say, oh, okay, it looks like an hagiasma, we see the niches and the water channels and so on. It looks dry. What is the solution? So another project, another MA project that was done by Senem Yıldız, she studied the hydrographical map of the region. And in this map, if you pay attention to the legends, the dashed lines in blue oh, okay, we are right here, first of all. You can see the dashed blue lines, which are indicating streams. River is indicated with the red lines, and the blue dots are the river reservoirs. So in the neighborhood of Anaia, we are at least looking at 5 or 6 of them. And then this is the area where the geographers collected their core samples to understand the historical topography and the hydrography of the site. So probably this hagiasma was being fed by a natural resource nearby. And this year, hopefully, with the financial support from the ministry, we are going to do a GPR around the hagiasma area to see water channels, the structure or the layout of the infrastructure, water infrastructure leading into the vaulted substructure. So after discussing the hagiasma evidence, let's now turn to the paintings, wall paintings coming from the building. I think in a way, the scenes that we see or the depictions we see in those paintings are going to show us the symbolic aquatic spaces, and you'll see what I mean by that. So these scenes are labeled or identified as Moses crossing the Red Sea by the 2024 publication by Mercan Göz. And if you pay attention, especially here, this is a scene that is talking about Moses leading the way for the Israelites and parting the Red Sea. That's how it's narrated. And using one of the drawings from the excavation archive, for example, we can say that although we are not seeing Moses himself, perhaps we are looking at Pharaoh. And this is often compared to the mosaic fragment or mosaic panel from the Church of Santa Maria Maggiore in Rome, where you're looking at the Pharaoh, and this is the Pharaoh at Anaia with a halo around his head, military costume, possibly on a horseback. And on either side of the vault, you see a group of guys. And these two scenes, although they are out of scale in this one, you should imagine Moses to be going down like this at the same level with the images over here. These two are connected with a band of flowers, which you see, and possibly, again, a good comparison for us would be Santa Maria Maggiore in Rome, which you see right here. And then there is another scene that is, maybe I should, let me go back. Yeah. No, it's not visible here, sorry. There is one more scene that is situated towards the north of this depiction of the Pharaoh, in which we are looking at those scenes, a female figure, couple of figures around here, horses, and so on. And then there is also a medallion that is connecting these two figures, Pharaoh here and the men, a group of men, right in the middle. Here, for example, the 2024 publication reads the letters gamma, eta, and alpha, possibly suggesting the word Aya. And it also suggests that possibly this is a depiction of the Virgin Mary. I am not sure about this depiction because we hardly get any depiction of her like this in a 5th century context. And judging from the anthropological evidence coming from the site, in which we have half of the population identified as female, and half of that female, or more than half of that female, is identified as young female, I'm wondering whether we are looking at perhaps a female cult or a commemoration of a female figure over here on the top of the arch. So this panel, which you see over here, the drawing and the actual photo, which is not very good, and I'm using the photos coming from the 2024 publication. This is identified as the as Lot's wife, who sort of, represented as holding her bag and turning head back as well over here. And a biblical character by identity, I should say. She is often seen as a disobedient woman who was turned into a pillar of salt for looking back to see the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah as she and her family was fleeing. So this is identified as Lot's wife. And then the figures over here, usually in the iconography, we are expecting to see the husband and the two daughters. But those figures, to me, they look very manly or masculine. I might be wrong. My iconography might be off, but I'm just thinking out loud here. One of the comparisons that the 2024 publication uses is the depiction of Lot and Abraham here, coming from Santa Maria Maggiore, and comparing it with the panel or the wall painting fragment coming from Anaia. Just if we take this attribution, I want to add an interpretation here. Usually, in her story, in the story of Lot's wife, we see what happens to those who chose a worldly life over salvation. And in the biblical narrative, we read that Lot's wife is described as being turned into a pillar of salt because she disobeyed God's instruction and looked back at the doomed city of Sodom and Gomorrah as it was being destroyed. So I'm especially, for example, curious about this light depiction over here, whereas the rest of her body is pretty much red, but this side is looking whitish, and I'm wondering whether we are actually, if this is Lot's wife, we are actually looking at her body turning into a pillar of salt. I don't know. Or it could be simply a salt efflorescence due to the lack of bad preservation for the wall painting. And I just want to suggest one more idea here as well. I think the story of Lot's wife, or in general the story of Lot, it serves us a cautionary tale about obedience and disobedience, while the scene with Moses speaks of the divine intervention, deliverance, and the lessons for the present. In terms of how can we fit those scenes in the context of the hagiasma, in the vaulted substructure, because the arches were added later to make the foundations for the church more stable in the aftermath of the earthquake in the 10th, 11th century. Parts of the scene are hidden in the program because of the arches that came in the 11th, as I said. Nevertheless, I think the hagiasma's reference to water, salvation, the blessing, is enriched by the wall painting's symbolic allusions to water, and the notion of divine intervention and the consequence of disobedience or faith, which strengthens the sacred role of this space under the eastern end of the church at Anaia. So to this sacred space effect that began in the 5th century and remodeled extensively in the 11th, sealed partially at the end of the 11th with the blocking of the north and the southern openings, and then being inaccessible in the 12th century with the destruction of the second vaulted area, and the addition of the city walls in the 13th century towards the eastern end of the vaulted substructure. I want to add the small finds, especially metal and glass finds, for us to discuss the interior design of the space as well. So I'm going to show you a couple of images coming from the excavations of the vaulted substructure, again using this doctoral dissertation talking about the metal evidence coming from the site. For example, the polycandelon attachments or chains that you see over here. These are coming from 2012, 2014. And then more hooks and details like that, because in the arches, in the substructure, we note several hooks that were used to light the space up for the polycandelon and so on. And then one more detail, polycandelon hanging pieces, and the pieces that are known as lamne or cosmetarizia, the metal bands that are used to wrap the glass goblets to hold up, are also found in the excavations. And then in 2022, more oil collection plates that was used to used for lighting the space, as well as the piece of a cross, were found. And then more importantly, in the 2022 season, we also found a total of 2,046 pieces of glass. These include 836 pieces of those glasses, window panes or window frame pieces, candles with goblets, glasses, bottles, bowls, bracelets, lamps with stemmed and goblet design were found. And I think discussed with the help of the metal finds as well as the glass finds, we are looking at sort of a sacred meaning of the space, ensured and underscored. And it also hints at a malleable interior design that sort of allowed for flexibility and adaptability in response to the changing needs and uses within the vaulted substructure. Okay, so let's talk about the final evidence, because my lecture is divided into three. The epigraphical detail. This block was found on the northwestern wall of the substructure, which is located right here. And then we are looking at the tabula ansata block, drawing which you see right here. It talks about a family originating from Samos in the Latin inscription on the edges. But within the frame, we are looking at an inscription that is studied by Hasan Malay, as I mentioned. You see the Greek text over here. And then you're looking at the translation right here, which says, I simply gonna read parts of it, but it simply says, on the bright day, which our ancestors properly called the Lord's Day, the persecution of all litigation, court business, and suits shall be entirely suspended. No person shall demand the payment of a public or a private debt, nor shall there be any cognizance of controversies before arbitrators, whether they have been requested or chosen voluntarily. Such a person shall be adjudged not only infamous and sacrilegious, but also be the subject of a sentence of a capital punishment. I think there are a couple of details that we need to highlight here. The first one, this codex was originally issued by Gratianus, Valentianus, and Theodosius I in 386. But the inscription that we see over here refers to a Principius as the Eparchos tis Aulis, who acted under Theodosius I. However, the inscription itself cites Theodosius and Valentianus, who co-reigned from 425 to 2050. And we know that although the codex was compiled during the reign of Theodosius I, It was published in 438, and this date, in a way, the announcement of this particular inscription on the wall and the publication of the Codex in 438, in a way, gives us a terminus postquem for the construction of this vaulted substructure. So, corroborating with Hasan Malay, two more scholars discuss the importance of this reading, Uta Hale and Fritz Mithoff, whose article you see over here. And I think their analysis helps us to understand this inscription better. They discuss that the Sunday law first came as an edict issued by the Byzantine Emperor Constantine I in 321. It made Sunday the official day of rest, and before the Sunday law was declared, only the church in Rome and some churches under its influence kept Sunday worship from the 2nd century onwards. In 386, Theodosius I instituted a Sunday law different from the one implied or imposed by Constantine the Great. He was actually the first emperor to implement a Sunday law and attach a Christian meaning to it. The late antique imperial constitution on the observance of Sunday, namely the prohibition of holding court proceedings, deciding about legal transactions, and collecting debts and other monetary claims, such as taxes, both private individuals and by the state, is of exceptional importance for several reasons. First, this inscription provides a concrete example of the form in which Sunday laws were publicly enacted in urban spaces in order to exert their normative effect. Second, the law is armed with a threat of punishment that could not be assumed from the parallels known so far. And the third one, the inscription provides a very rare opportunity for us to compare the Latin manuscript version of the Codex with that of the Greek one, which you see at Anaia. Okay. So, I gave you a little bit about architectural phasing. We described the context of the hagiasma. We looked at the wall paintings. We also described and discussed the inscription. And now I think we have to think about how we can make sense of all this evidence. Starting with the inscription, I think it's very relevant to the cultural history of Sunday, and it confirms the observation that judicial rest rather than a general work rest was an important fact in this period. The placement of the inscription in the substructure in a sacred space that is identified as an hagiasma, whose walls are depicted with the scenes alluding to the idea of salvation, I think is very remarkable. Especially this substructure connects or gets connected to the basilical church on top. And we get the designation of Sunday as the Lord's Day in this inscription. So perhaps its presumed initiator, the clergy at Anaia, and in that case we have to remember a couple of them, like Modestos, who was the bishop in 431 at the Council of Ephesus. Zotikos was the bishop at the 451 Chalcedon Council, and Markellos working as the bishop in 536. Can we assume that they were the ones who were making a decision to constantly remind the Christian community at Anaia about the Sunday law in this respect, and what kind of an impact this codex or this inscribed block had in the remaining or in the surroundings, in the close proximity of Anaia at sites like Ephesus and Miletus or Pyrene. Remember that in Ephesus, imperial statements of all kinds were displayed on stone monuments, so perhaps the figures at Anaia were sort of influenced, or they were attracted by this Ephesian practice of declaring laws and law codes on the stone monuments in public. So I think the inscription at Anaia in that sense possibly stands for the late antique epigraphic habit of navigating through public and sacred spaces. So we are talking about the idea of an hagiasma, which is a sacred structure that is supported with the help of the wall paintings. But with the addition of a law code, are we looking at a sacred structure turning into a public one? And what kind of a role that this inscription is actually supposed to have in the vaulted substructure? So in that regard, I want to refer to the beautiful article that's done by Amy Papalexandrou. In her Echoes of Orality in the Monumental Inscriptions of Byzantium, she argues that only recently have inscriptions been considered to shape architectural spaces, together with formal and architectural elements. She further argues that inscriptions on buildings can be seen as voices of the builders and the public. Could the Anaia inscription, as a monumental Byzantine inscription, initiate responses in such a dialogue? How was the inscription, or how was this inscription and this space seen by its users, its visitors, who inhabited this substructure from the 5th to the 11th centuries, for example, and how they interacted with it? Furthermore, how do the wall paintings and inscriptions help us read this archaeologically intervened space? I want to follow, in that regard, another art historian here, Liz James, and in her "And Shall These Mute Stones Speak?" Text as Art article, she questions, and here I quote her, "Visual signs are considered in terms of their visuality rather than what they say. And they were words placed on objects, always meant to be read, and by whom?" And I would like to argue that the complexity that we had with the location or the placement of the Anaia inscription and its associated archaeological context sort of leads me to think whether an everyday Anaian or a visitor was even expected to read them or understand them. In most cases, for example, in the epigrams of Pamakaristos or Polyektos or elsewhere in the Byzantine context, we know that those texts were sort of read to the people. That's how they made sense of it. So in conclusion, focusing on the placement, the function, and the display of the inscription, as well as the hydrographic and iconographic elements within this substructure, first I have argued whether the theme of salvation, alluding to the physical and iconographic waters, was the dominant theme at Anaia in the Byzantine context. As for the case of a crime and its imposed capital punishment, I would like to suggest that this inscription perhaps can be seen as a public text, almost like a reminder for the Anaians and the neighboring late antique cities. This corridor-like architectural segment that we see, before the openings were blocked on the north and the south, in the 11th century, it was likely to provide a passage for the people who entered the site. So if you ignore the 13th century walls over here, and before the building of before the construction of the wall on the south end, right here, they would be able to come into the site, use this passage, and then walk through the substructure and exit through here, and then go and visit the the church. So we should assume this space as a passage, as a public corridor. And in a way, going in and experiencing the space, the sound of the gushing water in the niches, water running through the channels, the space lightened up by the candles, by the lamps, the natural light passing through the windows that I showed, and everything shining through the walls, making the scenes visible and invisible. The visitor or the everyday Anaian sees the inscription, reads it, or have it read to them, or some sort of a connection there. A quick glance into the material evidence of the Theodosian period, especially in the cities of Constantinople, Sardis, Ephesus, Aizonai, Side, Perge, Sardis, Sagalassos, and Aphrodisias, reveals that this is a very fascinating period for Anatolia, which include a lot of building and rebuilding of the city walls, public structures, streets, churches, repurposing of temples and squares, which led a lot of scholars to call this period as a renaissance within the Byzantine period. So I'm wondering whether Anaia got its share with this vaulted substructure. And I'm also, I want to suggest that, if we move our attention away from the classical cities, of which I gave you a very nice list, and focus our attention on sites like Anaia, where we see a mound settlement, we would get a more fascinating or challenging picture. And with this slide, I want to end. Usually, excavations are team efforts, and at the beginning of my talk, I said I took the site over the leadership in 2022. And usually in periods like that, excavation projects are seen in a matter of flux, as if the old traditions are breaking down and the new traditions are being built up or trying to be established. So it sort of creates a chaotic and unknown setting. But I think what we are doing, starting from 2022 at Anaia, is sort of like a completion. That's how I see what I'm doing. And I think one of the best, I should say the best evidence for this statement, or the best support that I would get, is this image over here. All those fragments of the sgraffito ware, the thin sgraffito that we usually date to the mid-11th century, perhaps early 12th century. All those fragments were found in the vaulted substructure during the previous seasons. And we found this piece in 2022, perfectly fitting with the rest, making a more meaningful picture, adding more iconographical details. And I see this more of a completion than doing something brand new or breaking the tradition or the legacy. So I want to stop here and thank you for your attention. And hold on, I need to thank a lot of people. So the Ministry of Culture and Tourism, the Turkish Historical Society, the Governorship of Aydın and Kuşadası, Kuşadası Municipality, my institutions, formerly Bahçeşehir, now Muğla, Sıtkı Koçman University, and also from Norwich, we are Immersive, Marija Harris Foundation, and the British Council. I want to thank all my co-directors who have been working with me since 2022, the ones who left, as well as the ones who joined me recently, my team members, and more importantly, my students who are here, whose names are here, who did all those drawings, the ones that I used for today's presentation. Thank you so much.
Well, Suna, thank you very much. This was not half an hour, but I don't think that it could have been half an hour. Well, thank you very much for a very careful, very methodical, and for a presentation that actually attempted to really bring together many, many things, past, present, and hopefully future. So I will open the floor to questions from the room, but there's a question online which maybe can start the questions. It's not a small one. Will your work on Anaia, in general, hopefully lead us to new understandings of the coastal interactions throughout the archipelago and the mainland? And would you be able to compare and contrast the situation with some other coastal castles in the region near and far? I think this may be another lecture. Yes. But anyway, maybe you can start with that and then we can have a few questions sure. From the room.
Yes, this is one of the things that we want to pursue, especially understanding the type of the settlement at Anaia, because we are looking at a mound site that is fortified in the 13th century. So it pretty much defines its territory in the late Byzantine period. But I think the site itself, not only in the late Byzantine period, but also in the earlier period, was much larger. Possibly, when we walk around the site, underneath the summer houses that we see on the shoreline, we are looking at the Byzantine layers or the settlement. So our aim is to identify the type of the settlement, whether we are looking at an acropolis, and then we should search for a lower city on the foothills and on the immediate surroundings. The discussion with the harbor, I think, is very crucial. With the archival evidence, we made a lot of, we came to a very concrete evidence to identify whether there was a harbor or a pier, whether there was a shipyard, and why the shipyard was active even under the principalities as well. So we're going to work on that, identifying the coastal settlements. That's one of our aims, and we have a very good team of geographers. We decided to complement a team of geographers that's coming. I sort of inherited with the previous leadership, but I invited new scholars to the team who are doing more GIS or computer-generated studies. So I'm assuming, I'm hoping that we are going to combine the traditional and the cutting-edge technologies to study. In terms of identifying the coastal settlements, yes, you are right. It definitely, I can come next year to talk about that.
Are there any questions in the house? James?
Yes, excellent, thank you. I have a lot of questions. I will limit myself to one. During your discussion of the hagiasma, you mentioned an earthquake.
Yes.
So, could you please tell in what instances do you see seismic impacts on the site, and then how do you identify them, and possibly, do you see ruptures, do you see continuities in this stratigraphy?
There is a study done by Salomon Calvi about the ancient earthquakes and their impact. The earthquakes that took place in the 11th century, 1039, 1045, and 46, I think, or 49, their impact was 6.8, not in Richter, but there is another scale, MCK, Mendelov something. I'm not sure what is the difference between the two, since right now we are all accustomed to the Richter scale. But probably it was impactful. And at the site we see the impact of the earthquakes, not only in the hagiasma, but also on the city walls, in the baptistry, in the cisterns. I think it's all around. And in the earlier periods of the excavation, there has been a lot of research done about identifying the potential of the seismic activities in and around the site. Yeah.
Thank you.
Excuse me. First of all, I would like to thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. I have to make two comments.
Sure.
The first one is about the connection that you have already told us about the Santa Maria Maggiore, the church in Rome that became recently very famous because it's the place where Pope Francis was buried.
Yes.
And also the connection between Ephesus and Santa Maria Maggiore is very important because in 431, in the third synod, the ecumenical synod, it was the first time that Theotokos, that Santa Maria, Panagia, was recognized as the Mother of God. And when the Pope that was participating into that big synod, he went back in Rome and he built this Santa Maria Maggiore in the first church in Rome on the name of Panagia, of Santa Maria. And I think that this is exactly the same. That's how you connected all the depictions and the iconography between the two sides, which we know very well that Anaia is very close to Ephesus,
Yes.
And probably, and still in the Orthodox Church, we still have a bishop of Anaia, I don't know how you pronounce that, a bishop of Anaia. You know, Anaia is in Greek. And there is still one of them, and the place is considered sacred. And the second one is that all this beautiful theory that it was a passage through the baptismal, it's very interesting because even today in the Western Latin churches, the people before getting into the Sunday liturgy, they go first and take, the sacred water, hagiasma, before getting into the Mass. That's how this is the whole thing, going through the hagiasma, taking the water. Usually this is taken during the Sunday Mass, and watching the epigraph over there that this is a holy day and forget, all this business, reading this one, and go upstairs to the church and participate for the Lord's Day.
Yeah.
So I think that I enjoy very much this interpretation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for suggesting this Ephesus connection for the site, especially in regards to the relationship between Ephesus and Santa Maria Maggiore. This comparison, the Maggiore discussion, is something that the previous director, Zeynep Mercangöz, is doing in her publication. What I'm trying to do, and I'm very happy that you also made that connection, from the University of Bologna, my friend and fellow scholar, I've been working with Maria Cristina Carile, who's a well-known scholar for early Christian iconography. So we have been browsing through manuscripts, apocryphal stories, references to see whether we could take the narrative beyond the Santa Maria Maggiore connection. But yeah, thanks for highlighting that. This was something that Maria also mentioned to me, my friend, and also it's discussed in the publication by the previous director as well. Thank you. He always asks really tough questions.
This is why we bring him.
No, thank you very much, Suna, for this, and I'm really impressed by the progress, and I have been following this project, and congratulations.
Thank you.
My question is partly answered, or sort of, by the previous comment. I had actually two questions. The first was, do we have any idea? I mean, is there a pattern in terms of what kind of iconography you have in hagiasmata? And the second is, at first I was, I thought, how would you put such an inscription which only has a meaning in a public space in an hagiasma? Then you said it's a passage, which makes perfect sense given the location and the building. But then to my mind, you know, with my totally contemporary knowledge of hagiasma, it seems strange to have an hagiasma which is in a passage, in a public passage. Yet they tend to be, you know, secluded, you know, dead-end places.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have any parallels. That's what.
I mean, the only thing perhaps the only open-air hagiasma I can think of would be the one in Ephesus, but it's not Byzantine. You can just, you know, walk at it, get your water, that's it. Usually, as you said, they come from a very confined architectural space. They are not meant to be contaminated by like a daily movement of people. So that's something that I couldn't really figure out, and thanks for picking up on that. So as I said, he always comes up with the tough ones. But yeah, I really appreciate that, yeah. I cannot come up with any parallels, but I'll definitely think about that, what you highlighted. Yeah, thank you, Kosti.
And we have one last question. Well, maybe more.
Well, thank you very much for the very nice presentation. We almost watched people coming through and drinking water or filling their jugs with holy water. I would like to ask about the second space. I would like to hear more about that. I mean, okay, it is destroyed. You didn't tell us how it was destroyed. But what is the connection? I mean, some things remain. Maybe the vaults could be measured. Mm-hmm. And I would like to see a longitudinal section.
Yep.
Comparing the two spaces, because the other one is also very important.
Yeah. I mean, construction-wise, it sort of mirrors the vaulted substructure. Construction-wise, it mirrors the vaulted substructure. So in the phase, we have the pilasters, and then they built stronger piers attached to the wall. Chronologically speaking, the earthquake that damaged that part of the substructure would be coming in the 12th century, possibly. And my theory, don't laugh at me, I think there is a substructure that is running from east to west in the building. Because I think it was in 2023, we excavated a burial within the narthex, within the inner narthex. Under the burial, we found water channels running within the building. So whatever we are looking at, and also on the side walls of the church, on the longer walls of the church, we get to see a starting of the arches every here and there. So if we were to move beyond whatever is on the surface outside the church, those later phases, we might be able to understand the elevation of the building much better. So I think, you know, one section would be an hagiasma, the other section would be totally structural, supporting the building on top, and then maybe towards the nave or the naos of the church, you know, we might get maybe cisterns, as was the practice in the Byzantine period. Although the reason I'm saying this, because, you know, most of the cisterns that we identified or that was identified at the site before I arrived were all later in date. So I think they needed some sort of a water reservoir there. So probably, you know, it was starting from the sacred on the eastern and then going structural and then becoming maybe functional in space and then, you know, being used for collecting water.
So we have a lot more to see in the future.
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, this summer, within the next 2 weeks or so, we will start a GPR project. We got the permit and the money. I want to thank the ministry again for sending us the money. We'll do the GPR and other ERT, other techniques to see what's going on under the, buried context, as well as what's going on behind the walls as well. So it will give us a better picture about the structure.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Do you mind if I allow 2 questions, but
No,
try and
no.
make them short?
So they are all very
So,
good.
Christo, Bona?
Thanks so much. I will be short because part of my question was already just answered, but the other part has to do with the windows and where you imagine them being in a substructure that was eventually or was designed to be covered over by the church. Have you had a hypothesis about where they might be located, or do you know where they are?
I didn't get the part with the windows.
Yes, just, I mean, you had the glass, but how about the location of the windows?
Where would they be?
Where would they be?
The only windows we have are within the niches. That's it, in the vaulted substructure. And then there are some little arches that are built in order to sort of divide the thrust coming from the walls down to the rest of the walls. That's it. We don't have any other openings.
Right, and these are light-emitting openings, but they're below the level of the church. Sorry to be confused. I'm a little bit confused on the elevation.
You're talking about the windows within the church on the upper level, or the church?
Whichever ones you had been mentioning to that had the glass.
No, only
Yeah.
within the niches we have the windows, and
Okay.
then the openings on the north and the south, I think they were allowing light to go in. That was it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And the person in the row in the back? Last one, I promise.
You mentioned that the building was being demolished. Does it mean that it was destroyed by human force or by natural factors?
I didn't get the question.
You mentioned in the presentation that the building of the church was being demolished in 12th century.
Yes.
Does it mean that it was destroyed by human factor rather than natural factor?
Which part I said the church was demolished in the 5th? Am I?
Did
I say that?
Yeah. You have said that.
No, it was constructed in the mid-5th century or the 5th century.
Yeah, but it was destroyed. It was demolished later.
You mean like abandoned?
Yeah.
Yeah. In the 14th century context, especially in the northern aisle of the church, they identified glass production areas, so this is one of the things that the previous team decided to argue for an abandonment in the 14th century, saying like the church was stopped being used by the Byzantines. Perhaps this was the time that the Idonids, the Turkish principality, was conquering in the region. They took over the site, and then the church lost its importance and its function in the 14th century. So we would see the abandonment around that period.
So when the site, the archaeological site was abandoned, it was not controlled by a Byzantine Empire anymore.
No.
By
starting
Ottoman,
from 1304, this region surrounding Ephesus and Anaia and Kuşadası area is conquered by a Turkish or Muslim principality that's known as the Idonids. And at the site, we identified at least 50 or 60 Idonid coins. So we can talk about some sort of a presence at the site in the 14th century.
Thank you.
Well, I think we can let you go, and maybe we can all convene downstairs for a glass of wine. Thank you very much, Suna, for a very lively. Thank you.
you.